Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me today is Morgan Jameson. He is the Business Engagement Director for Equality Virginia, a statewide organization that focuses on advocacy for the LGBTQ community. Thank you so much for being here, Morgan.
Thank you, Catherine, for having me. I'm excited to be joining you today.
So you are in a new position. So Equality Virginia has been around since 1989, first as Virginians for Justice. There's been a lot of work to do here in the Commonwealth of Virginia around supporting the LGBTQ community. But you are specifically focused on businesses. Give us a little background as to why Equality Virginia has decided to focus on that.
Sure thing, absolutely. And thank you for mentioning we are a 30-year-old organization, 30 years young. And there has been a lot that we have been working on over the years. Specifically why we got engaged with the business community. Virginia is constantly one of the top places to do business in the country. And it's a good thing. We have a lot of major corporations here, as well as Main Street businesses and mom and pop businesses that have protections in the workplace that protect LGBT individuals and members of the community. In the Commonwealth and in the majority of states, people can be fired for being perceived as being members of the LGBT community. And in a state that is not only right to work, but all of our other laws is state that people can be fired. It's an at-will state, and people can be fired for any reason. So one of the reasons we got engaged with the business community was to strengthen those relationships with business partners that have internal policies that protect LGBT individuals, and through some of that outreach, some businesses start to think about needing to incorporate those because they do have such a strong voice and really do lead a lot of discussion on the issues, including on policy. A lot of businesses are now taking up social policies as part of what they do in their typical work, and they want to see reflected in the communities that they do business in.
There was a recent summit, and I attended that summit, where, to your point, there were major corporations talking about their advocacy work on behalf of their employees in states like North Carolina and Texas that were trying to pass policies that were hostile to the LGBTQ community. And so these major corporations that work in multiple states have said, on behalf of our employees, we are going to get in the fight. And I think that's fairly recent.
That's true. There are what are known as employee resource groups, business resource groups,
Right.
affinity groups within
United
companies.
Airlines is one of them. I didn't realize how big their ERG was.
Oh, absolutely. Their ERG is pretty massive, and one of the longest ERGs is Booz Allen Hamilton. I don't want to say how many years they've been around. I don't want to misquote that, but they're not newer things, but these are formed so that there's communities within the workplace. And people have a place to go. And the LGBT community is not the only affinity group that many of these
Right.
organizations have, but it is the most intersectional, because a lot of them also take allies and others, whether or not they have a connection to the LGBT community or not, and they just want to be a supporter. But having businesses out there saying, we support you. In order to be productive in the workplace, you need to feel as though you're not looking over your shoulder every day or worried about something. So when your employer is out there saying, we value our employees and these laws are discriminatory, or these proposed laws, then that really does show value to the employees, that the employer is doing that.
A huge commitment. And so what's interesting too about some of these major corporations, and Fairfax County in particular is home to Hilton and Volkswagen, and a lot of major companies chose to make their headquarters here. And of course, Amazon HQ2 is here in Northern Virginia too. These are companies that have made a commitment to their employees through their own policies that protect their own employees from discrimination based on, as you said, a perceived membership in the LGBTQ community. But what that's left out is people who are not part of major corporations, who have jobs in smaller businesses across the Commonwealth of Virginia, and who are not protected from being fired or being discriminated in other ways, because they are perceived to be in the LGBTQ community. So I'm heartened by the fact that Equality Virginia has made an investment in having you go out, and here in Northern Virginia specifically, and try to get businesses interested in taking what they have made a commitment to in their own private corporations and help to support the fight to make this the standard public policy for all businesses in Virginia.
Absolutely. So the program that I seek for these businesses to join is called Virginia Competes, which is a free program for them to sign on to, saying that their policies reflect what our values are.
And you've got some heavy hitters on that list, like Altria and Reed Smith, and just the list is very long, gets longer all the time.
Absolutely. In the last 12 months of being on with Equality Virginia, when they decided to create this position, the program has almost doubled in size, which is really remarkable. We've actually had some major corporations reach out to us saying, how do we join? And it's simple. They go online, they fill it out, and I do a little bit of background cross-check in terms of are they qualified. We have some parameters, including the Corporate Equality Index is a pretty good score. The HRC, Human Rights Campaign.
They do that for localities and businesses.
Right.
There's an index.
Right. So the Corporate Equality Index is the index for businesses, and not everybody's on it, but a lot of the major, if not most of the major corporations are on there. So it's pretty easy to see where they're falling. One of our baselines is making sure that they have 75% or higher on that index. If they're not on the index for whatever reason, one of the things that we ask for is their internal policies, and just give those reviewed to make sure that they explicitly define the LGBT community as one of the workplace protections that they offer. And I don't want to call that simple. It took a lot for businesses to get there, to realize that there are people who are not in the boilerplate non-discrimination, zero harassment policies that aren't covered under laws that they need to incorporate in those statements. And for a while, for a very long time, the LGBT community has been excluded. And these are companies that are taking that bold step to say, we want you to be included and we want you to feel protected. There was actually a business that recently joined Virginia Competes that shared with us a story of an individual who was going to be a candidate for a position with them that ultimately turned down that opportunity because there are no protections in Virginia. That person is a trans woman, and they said that they were not willing to move to Virginia because of the lack of protections. Despite this business having protections on the inside, the state as a whole doesn't have those protections, and they wouldn't feel comfortable being here, which is sad. That's talent that they were recruiting that has ultimately decided not to participate in the economy here in Virginia, or broaden or better that workplace, despite their great internal environment. So the fight doesn't stop in the workplace.
It doesn't, and that's a nice segue into the three-pronged agenda that Equality Virginia has had for the last 10 years. That's employment non-discrimination, it's housing non-discrimination, and public accommodations. So even if this employee were to come and work for a company that had employment protections, they're not protected from being turned down from housing. They're not protected from being turned away from a business that chooses not to serve them.
Absolutely. And I'll take it a step further. One of the things that we've been doing on the employment front has traditionally been public employees. The General Assembly being the ultimate employer, through the executive. The General Assembly being the ultimate employer of so many thousands of Virginians. You would think that they would want to enact those protections internally. Granted that there have been executive orders and actions signed by previous gubernatorial administrations, including this one, but nothing is codified. And we're taking this a step further to say, anybody working in Virginia, and that's something that's going to be new.
It is new
for a lot of people, including those who have been supporting the issues we've worked on in the past. So it'll be interesting to see how some of them react to this notion of it's not just public employees, it's not just the people who you're writing a budget for, it's everyone. But I think having businesses that say we already do this is important.
I do too. And the fact of the matter is, for the last 10 years, because last year all three of the bills that covered public accommodation, housing, and employment non-discrimination were shot down. I mean, they have been every year for the last 10 years because
some of them passed the Senate.
They did. Some of them, you're right, some of them passed the Senate. We should say it's the House that corralled them all together and then shot them dead, in my opinion, because that's what it felt like. But that employment non-discrimination was specifically for public employees because that's truly what we thought we had a shot to get. But that was when Republicans controlled both chambers. That is now over. It's a new day in Virginia. Democrats control both chambers going into the 2020 legislative session. So appropriately, the employment non-discrimination bill has been broadened.
It has been broadened, but again, with the new friendly leadership in the House of Delegates in Virginia, many of these things are going to be new in front of them. So there's going to be still a need for public advocacy, education with these elected officials, and also bringing forward the businesses that already support these issues.
We need to hear their voices, and moreover, we need people to come to Richmond between January 8th and March 7th so that we send a clear signal to everyone in the Commonwealth of Virginia that a majority of Virginians support non-discrimination for the LGBTQ community. And surveys that Equality Virginia and others have done in the Commonwealth of Virginia clearly show that the overwhelming majority of Virginians support non-discrimination. And so I encourage everybody to think about February 4th, which is a Tuesday, is going to be Lobby Day for Equality Virginia. And when we come back from the break, we'll discuss more about how you can help support our efforts here in Virginia.
I got a creak in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. Better than words get on. Very sad all that I could do was remember you. You know I usually say no, but if you throw me love, I'll throw you some more.
Your time is gonna come. Your time is gonna come. It's up to you to reach out to be that friend who comes along. Your day is gonna come.
When you make a friend, you make a difference.
Your day is gonna come.
Friendship, pass it on. A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
What are you looking for?
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and today we are talking with Morgan Jameson. He is the Business Engagement Director for Equality Virginia, the statewide organization focused on advocacy for the LGBTQ community. Thank you so much for being here, Morgan.
Absolutely, Catherine. And again, thank you so much for having me. It's a vitally important time to be having this conversation.
It's a new day in Virginia, a new day.
Absolutely is.
And what people need to be focused on is that the legislative session, and we do have a part-time legislature, it meets 60 days on even years, 45 on odd ones, so we've got 60 days in 2020.
They're not all business days. Part of those days are weekends, too.
Right, and so the session starts January 8th, goes through March the 7th. There's a reason we want people to be focused on this, and the fact that Equality Virginia has their lobby day on Tuesday, February 4th. We have a vested interest in getting a lot of engagement this year, and and that's individual citizens, but also to your world, it's the companies we were speaking about, encouraging their employees to engage in the public policy process.
Absolutely. So everybody in general, and including the companies that I work for, having some of those stories of these practices are great internally, but as soon as somebody leaves a corporate campus, all of those protections are gone. And that is what speaks to the public accommodations. You can have folks saying, I experience these in the workplace, and then I go somewhere else and, open to any form of discrimination. So in addition to our Advocacy Day in Richmond, our Lobby Day of Action, I would encourage folks, may they be employees of major corporations or other places that protect individuals, or people like you and me, going on to the Virginia General Assembly's website and looking up who their legislator is and being in touch with their legislator, seeing when those town halls are, despite the session counting weekend days. Very few of those weekends are worked unless it's a town hall. And many legislators do town halls at the beginning of session, at a middle of session at a period called crossover, and then toward the end of the General Assembly session as well. So there are opportunities to see folks, but one of the most important times is before that crossover period, because if bills haven't been heard, if bills haven't, proposed legislation hasn't been voted on by the entire body, it doesn't have its opportunity to be heard in the other body, and you really need that legislation to come through both bodies to get it on the governor's desk to be signed into law. So as I was saying before the break, some of these things are going to be new to these legislators. A lot of folks have said, "Oh, Equality Virginia, you've got two favorable chambers. Things might be easy for you," and the answer is no. Nothing's easy, and you don't take your foot off the gas, not even after you get what you want, because there's so many things out there that Equality Virginia is working
accountability and implementation.
Absolutely.
Right, and we find this with legislation, just because something goes into effect January 1 or July 1, not everybody gets the word. There's not necessarily an arm of accountability that says it's the new regulation, but is everybody doing it, right?
Right.
So there is a lot more than just passing the legislation. But you are an insider in that you've actually worked on the staff of a delegate, and so you know how the process works, and the fact that every phone call, every email, every time somebody shows up and wants to speak to a legislator or wants to talk about a bill, it's recorded. A lot of people are like, what difference would my emailing my delegate or my senator make? What difference would a phone call make? But it does make a difference, doesn't it?
I would caution the word recorded and more so use the word documented. We document anytime anybody. There's no point scale or otherwise. We do say constituents or non-constituents. That's something that I have done, which gives you a total number of unique individuals who have reached out about a particular topic and the way they're leaning on it. Ultimately, these elected officials work for us, we the people, and it's important that we engage. It's not just election day saying, "Oh, you've done a good job," or "You haven't, we're replacing you." It's making sure we're engaged with them, because legislators do the work of the community. I can't begin to tell you how many folks said, "Yeah, it was a great campaign, I got elected, but I'm not really hearing from my community about what they want." They have to go off the voices of a few, and there is an overwhelming majority in Virginia that support these issues on the whole, that if they spoke, it would be a no-brainer. for many of these.
Well,
these
it would be a
legislators.
mandate, and that's what we're actually looking for. And so, often when I have been working on a bill, and I call a legislator's office and say, "How is this particular delegate voting?" and they'll say, "Well, what is the bill number and what's it about?" And I will give them that information. Sometimes they'll say, "Well, we haven't heard from our constituents on this," and that's why it makes a difference for you to write the email or make the phone call or stop by your legislator's office, because when 10 people are all interested in a bill, or 20 people, or there's 100 emails all urging a legislator to take a particular position, they pay attention, as you said, especially to their constituents.
Every session, there's always the which issue did you put a filter on in your email because you're getting a lot about that particular bill number, or that one year was something like milk. It's like, how many milk emails did you get today?
Right.
And people talk. It becomes this thing that, there's a lot of pressure and things. And I'm not dismissing it. Whatever your issue is, I encourage you to engage. Obviously, I'm hoping that folks engage
With this issue.
With this issue, right?
And that's why we're doing a whole show about it.
Right,
is
exactly.
It's like you may say, well, I agree with we should not have discrimination of any kind in Virginia. And they say something like 80% of Virginians believe that. But if you don't say that, if you don't show up, raise your hand, send an email, take a stand, take a position, then no one knows that.
Right. Show up at town halls too. Like I said, that's a great opportunity in your own community where you're not doing something remote, but you're doing it in person, and the legislator can really see firsthand what that looks like. Sometimes it can just be numbers on paper. You look up in where this information has been documented. It's like, all right, this many people, that many people. But if you have a room that holds 100 and 60 people stand up and say, we support this issue, that's important. So there are opportunities in your own backyard as well as engaging directly in Richmond or remotely with the legislative offices. And you don't have to wait to the General Assembly session to start either. Get on this information now. The bill drafting period and pre-filing is coming up soon. So when you're talking to these members, they might call their fellow colleagues and say, is anyone doing this issue? And it gets that conversation started earlier rather than being reactionary. They can be proactive during the General Assembly session.
Absolutely. And I do want to say, when we talk about the LGBTQ community, the transgender community, faces particular challenges. Somebody may or may not be able to suspect or know whether or not you're gay or lesbian or bisexual, right? But being transgender generally brings with it a whole host of different kinds of hurdles, including bathroom bills. And this is one of the issues down in HB2 in North Carolina that really activated a lot of corporations in getting in the fight, sending their legislative government affairs person down there saying, absolutely not. We are going to fight you on this because it is a detriment to our employees.
It's interesting that you mentioned North Carolina's HB2. There was actually another HB2, almost the exact same language, but also HB2, that was introduced in, I believe, the 2014 General Assembly session. It was either 2014 or 2015, by then Delegate Bob Marshall, who was trying to propose this, and that actually stopped in the Virginia General Assembly. It didn't get further out of the committee because of the number of advocates who showed up. There was an overwhelming amount of people who were against that bill, or rather in support of the LGBT community, especially the T in LGBT, the transgender community, showing up saying, this is ridiculous. So luckily, we were ahead of North Carolina on that one, having defeated that in a way. And of course, Bob Marshall is no longer here as a elected official in the Commonwealth. But
having been replaced by Danica Rome, who is the first ever transgender individual to win a spot on any state legislature anywhere in the United States.
Absolutely.
I tell you, karma, man.
Absolutely.
Karma.
And just ask her about Route 28, because I
That's her thing. And everybody in her district loves the fact that, man, if you drive down 28, you can see the construction happening right now.
It is absolutely happening. And, just because people are the first or labeled as something or the other, there's so much that is packaged in what their interests are and what composes who they are. When folks are members of marginalized communities, it's important that they be advocates for their own community, but it doesn't mean it needs to be the most important
aspect
issue
of who they are. It should not define who they are, and certainly Danica's focus on fixing Route 28 has been the defining characteristic that most people care about in her district anyway.
Absolutely, and that goes for the folks who come and testify on bills. Anytime there's a bill presented in the General Assembly, when there's a hearing, there's typically open comment period, open testimony that happens. It's very short notice. Sometimes these bills get assigned the day before they're heard. But folks coming and telling their story, sharing stories that reflect values, saying, this is why this piece of legislation is important to me. I'm a homeowner, I'm a this, I'm a that, or this has happened to me in the past and this is important. You don't have to be a member of the LGBT community to have experienced, faced, seen, or otherwise encountered discrimination against those of the LGBT community. It may have happened to you as somebody perceived you as a member of the LGBT community, and coming down and saying that those aren't the values that you believe in as a Virginian, as somebody who works here, who lives here, who wants to raise a family here, who visits here. We have folks from out of state coming and saying, I used to vacation all the time in Virginia, but this isn't okay. So, anybody who ever passes through Virginia, we want to make sure that they are equally protected under the law.
Absolutely. It's frequently said that Virginia's doors are open for business, but we need to be welcoming and inclusive, and everybody needs to be, all are welcome here, which is actually the motto of Virginia. The fairness is all are welcome here.
Yep.
And I think your work with the business community, particularly here in Northern Virginia, because Equality Virginia is headquartered in Richmond. And so a lot of people in Northern Virginia may or may not have heard of Equality Virginia or engaged with them. But your presence, your position with Equality Virginia, your focus, the way you've built Virginia Competes to bring together people who have like-minded values has been invaluable. And I hope that people will join you in this year in 2020.
I hope so as well. An interesting statistic, and thank you very much for those kind words. An interesting statistic that I was informed of yesterday is that if these laws are passed in Virginia, we will be the last state, rather conversely, we are the only state that Hillary Clinton won that does not have protections for the LGBT community.
And on that note, for you at home, this is what you need to know.